1993. Year on the edge. The great turning point. Changing of the guard at the White House. America's hope for an American listener. 1993 began with triumph and immense hope. On January 20th, after 12 years of conservative rule, the long era of Reagan and Bush Sr., a 46-year-old charismatic leader, Bill Clinton, came to power in the United States. This was a tectonic shift in politics. Clinton won with a powerful breakthrough, gaining 43% of the popular vote. His main rival, George H.W. Bush, a veteran of the Cold War, received 37.4%. The third player, billionaire Ross Perot, took nearly 19%, showing that America was hungry for change. Clinton brought in a team of pragmatic technocrats. His slogan, "It's the economy, stupid," became the foundation of a new era. While the United States celebrated a gross domestic product growth of 2.7% and a record low inflation of 3%, the new president played the saxophone on late-night talk shows, embodying a young, confident superpower that had just won a global clash of systems. Economic apocalypse and the energy paradox. But while champagne was being poured in Washington, on the other side of the world, in Ukraine, 1993 became a time of shock without therapy. The country set a world anti-record. Annual inflation reached a staggering 10,155%. To understand the scale of the catastrophe, store prices could change twice a day. A simple loaf of bread that cost 500 coupons in the morning could cost 700 by the evening. With the world gold price at $380 per ounce, the average Ukrainian, with a monthly salary of $15, which was about 1.2 grams of gold, could only afford survival. For comparison, in the United States, an average salary of $2,100 could buy 170 grams of pure gold. This colossal gap in living standards was more than 140-fold. By the beginning of that year, Ukraine's gold reserves were officially equal to absolute zero. All the gold of the former empire remained in Moscow. At the same time, the country faced the paradox of the rich in the dark. Ukraine possessed incredible energy power, 5 nuclear power plants and cascades of massive hydroelectric stations. Yet, the cities were plunged into pitch-black gloom. The reason was massive strikes at more than 200 coal mines in the Donbass. Miners with faces blackened by coal dust sat on the asphalt in the center of Kyiv for weeks, demanding wages that inflation had already devoured. Coal supplies to thermal power plants stopped. The gas debt to Russia grew to an astronomical $800 million. A country capable of lighting up half of Europe introduced humiliating rolling blackouts. Power in residential buildings was cut according to a schedule, turning the evenings of millions into a life by candlelight. Nuclear poker and IMF loans. In international politics, Ukraine in 1993 was a true nuclear heavyweight, ranking 3rd in the world in the number of warheads. There were 1,760 intercontinental missiles on its territory. Bill Clinton's administration understood that this was the main risk to global security. Aid from the International Monetary Fund was not a gift or an act of mercy. It was a deal with strict conditions. Kyiv was told directly, "You want tranches to save your currency? First, give up the missiles." Under the Nunn-Lugar program, The United States allocated $175 million for disarmament, but this money effectively never left America. It went to pay the wages of American engineers and companies that came to dismantle Ukrainian bombers and missile silos. Leonid Kuchma, who served as prime minister until September 1993, desperately tried to keep the situation under control, but resigned, realizing that the old bureaucracy and economic chaos were blocking any attempts at reform. Tanks in Moscow. CNN live. In early October 93, the world literally froze in front of television screens. A bloody conflict began in Russia between President Boris Yeltsin and the parliament led by Rutskoy and Khasbulatov. It was a real miniature civil war in the heart of Moscow. On October 4th, T-80 tanks drove onto the bridge and fired 12 shells at the Supreme Soviet building, which everyone called the White House. Officially, 147 people died then, but according to independent data, the death toll could have reached 1,500. The entire Western world saw these images live on CNN.
Washington spent those days in terror. There was a real risk that the nuclear briefcase would fall into the hands of radicals, which would mean the beginning of a global catastrophe. Meanwhile, Mikhail Gorbachev, the man who actually dismantled the Soviet Union and changed the course of history, was completely forgotten during those days. He sat in his foundation, stripped of power and influence, helplessly watching blood being spilled on the ruins of his empire. He had become a man without a country. Sevastopol. Dividing the Black Sea Fleet for debt. On September 3, 1993, an episode occurred in Massandra that historians call the gas captivity. Ukraine found itself pinned against the wall by massive debts for energy resources. At that time, the entire property of the Black Sea Fleet was valued at approximately $80 billion. In the gold equivalent of that time, that's a fantastic 6,500 tons. Russia offered a deal: full cancellation of the $800 million debt, which was only about 65 tons of gold, in exchange for the transfer of the entire fleet to Moscow's control. It was an attempt to buy one of the world's most powerful strategic assets for 1% of its real value. Ukraine, whose shipyards in Mykolaiv had built these ships for decades, was forced to give up its naval power just to avoid freezing during the coming winter. Social chaos. From MMM to Kashpirovsky. When faith in official government institutions finally collapsed, messiahs and adventurers took the stage. Advertisements for the MMM financial pyramid of Sergei Mavrodi, featuring the character Lyonya Golubkov, became the main television show of the country. MMM tickets grew in value tenfold in just a couple of months. People brought their last savings, hoping for a miracle. The famous Alisa exchange appeared, owned by 24-year-old German Sterligoff, with a Caucasian shepherd dog on the logo, a symbol of how millions could be made out of nothing in the chaos. Under conditions of wild stress, millions of people sought salvation in mysticism. Alan Chumak charged water and creams with his hand gestures through the TV screen, and Anatoly Kashpirovsky conducted mass hypnosis sessions promising healing from all diseases. It was a collective psychosis of a nation whose future had been taken away. For November 14, 1993, the White Brotherhood cult scheduled the end of the world. Thousands of followers of Maria Devi Christos arrived in Kyiv, preparing for a mass self-immolation in St. Sophia Cathedral to go to higher worlds and avoid seeing the collapse of civilization. At the same time, teachers and top-tier doctors with a salary of $10 seeing the price of one pair of Chinese sneakers turned into shuttle traders or independent small-scale entrepreneurs. They traveled to Poland and Turkey, carrying huge checkered bags weighing 50 kilograms on their backs. Near Odessa in '93, the 7th Kilometer Market opened, a giant market made of shipping containers which became the largest wholesale hub in Europe. Here, the intelligentsia learned to survive by trading jeans and cheap electronics, laying the foundation for the first wild entrepreneurship. Cultural landing, Jackson and Soros. The West entered people's consciousness not with tanks, but with soft power. In September 1993, Michael Jackson flew to Moscow. For the people, it was like the landing of an alien spaceship. An official ticket to the concert cost about $15, exactly a Ukrainian teacher's monthly salary. Due to wild inflation and poverty, the stadium could not be filled with paying spectators, and organizers began letting people in for free to create a visual for television. The 35-year-old Jackson, at the peak of his fame, visited orphanages and marched on the parade ground with soldiers of the Taman Division, the very same soldiers who, just 2 weeks later, would be firing at their own parliament from tanks. During the same period, billionaire George Soros began his large-scale investment in the brains of the former enemy. He allocated $100 million to save science in the CYS countries. A Soros grant of $500 allowed a world-class scientist to live and work comfortably for almost 2 years. His famous quote was, "I want you not to build bombs, but to build science for an open society." It was the most effective and softest way to control the intellectual elite. The United States bought the loyalty of an entire generation of scientists with grants, genes, and pop music. We realized we bought freedom with these attributes of Western life, while Americans believed they had defeated us ideologically.
Summary and a look into the future. 1993 was a time of the sharpest contrast in 20th century history. While one part of humanity entered the era of digital prosperity and the boom of Wall Street, the second fought for physical survival, trading a nuclear arsenal for gas supplies and scientific degrees for a spot at a flea market. It was the year when old alliances burned in the flames of tank shelling, and new ones were built on the terms of the harshest pragmatism. We saw how fragile any stability is, and how quickly yesterday's idols turned to dust. But this was only the equator of the great 90s. We continue to navigate the ocean of this turbulent era, and there are many more dramas and discoveries ahead. Do you think Ukraine and the entire post-Soviet space had another path of development in those years? Or was the Clinton and Yeltsin scenario the only possible price to avoid a major nuclear war? Perhaps we missed some important detail of that life. Write your vision in the comments. It is very important for us to hear your stories. If you are interested in history without filters, subscribe to the channel and like this video. We'll see you in the next episode, where the 90s will become even hotter and more unpredictable.